Hi, I'm Michelle Reinhardt. Good afternoon. I'm Assistant Dean for the Academic Affairs and Outreach in the College of Architecture at Georgia Tech, and today I've been asked to lead a session on selecting a graduate program in architecture. The session will be divided in three parts. The first will review the types of graduate architecture programs available. The second will discuss strategies for selecting a graduate program. And the third will be an overview of the admissions process and what materials you will need to prepare a successful application. Graduate education in architecture can take many forms. For students who already have already graduated from an accredited professional program, such as a Bachelor of Architecture or the M.Arch, it provides an opportunity for more advanced or more specialized post-professional study. Often, these programs will be a Master of Science in Architecture or Architectural Studies and the PhD. There are also specialized degrees in areas such as sustainable design, history of architecture, or urban design that students may wish to consider. All of these programs vary in length, especially when considering the doctoral degree. For students who have a pre-professional 4-year degree in architecture, such as the Bachelor of Science, Bachelor of Arts, or a Bachelor of Environmental Design, pursuing an accredited Master or Doctor of Architecture, the M.Arch or the D.Arch, is an important step to becoming a licensed architect. Depending on the institution you choose, the length of the program will likely fall between 2 and 3 years, but I will refer to these programs as 2-year Master of Architecture programs. For students who have undergraduate degrees in fields other than architecture, such as business, English, engineering, psychology, or something else, an accredited Master of Architecture or Doctor of Architecture, as I mentioned above, is the preferred degree if considering a career as a licensed architect. And depending on the institution you select, again, you can expect to spend between 3 or 4 years completing your degree. But I will refer to these as 3-year M.Arch programs. Our focus today will be on selecting an accredited graduate program, although many of the things I will talk about will be relevant to post-professional degree programs as well. There are many institutions that offer accredited graduate degrees in architecture, and there are a variety of websites available that will help you to narrow your options. The website of the National Architectural Accrediting Board, or the NAB, lists all accredited degree programs in the United States, as well as programs in the process of gaining accreditation. Their website is naab.org. Also, ACSA's online Guide to Architecture Schools, found at archschools.org, has a broad search engine for accredited programs both in the United States and Canada. Since there are so many programs to select from, the first thing that I recommend is to take some time to write your own statement about architecture. Initially, it will be a valuable tool in winnowing down your list of options. But in the longer term, it will become the bones for your personal statement needed for your applications. This statement should touch on your values, short-term interests, and professional aspirations. Some of the questions you should ask yourself include, why are you studying architecture? What do you expect to learn? And what do you hope to contribute? What kind of architect or designer do you aspire to be? What architectural and related skills have you already acquired? And what additional skill sets do you need to practice the kind of architecture that interests you? Also, are you considering a career outside of traditional architectural practice, and what might that look like? And what kind of environment do you want to be in for your graduate experience? And this would include things such as the geographic region or the city size, the facilities and amenities available at the institution, and the social community and studio culture, and other issues like that. You should have this statement handy as you start to look at school websites. By continuing to reflect on your own responses to these questions, you will find that your list will narrow. Of course, school websites are the most immediate tools in finding out more about the programs, but don't forget to check your local campus or local library for printed materials. Many architecture programs publish periodic journals and catalogs of student work and faculty research that can give you a real sense of what the program is all about. And you should also feel comfortable with talking with your current or former faculty members, as well as local design professionals, about the schools that interest you, and also about why they interest you. They often will have valuable feedback and may also have colleagues at these programs to connect you with. There are, of course, limitations to how much information you can find on the internet or in publications. Unfortunately, I find that the majority of students narrow their list without even contacting any of the schools and wait to reach out only once they've been accepted. One of the best ways you can narrow your list is by contacting the schools directly, allowing you to delve deeper into the information they provide on their websites. Some of the questions you should ask include whether or not there are any required courses you need to take before you can submit your application. In some cases, two-year programs may require a specific level of calculus or physics, regardless of the structural systems courses you may have completed in your pre-professional program. Knowing this prior to your senior year allows you to add on courses that you may need. For three-year programs, you may find that calculus and physics are typically required, given that they admit students with widely varying undergraduate backgrounds. If you do not complete these courses in your college career, you may be able to satisfy the requirement by taking the courses at a local 2- or 4-year college or university. Be sure to contact the schools on your list directly to see whether there are specific requirements for completing these courses. Another question is that given your educational experiences, where and how will you be placed into their program? It's important to note that some 3-year M.Arch programs will provide advanced standing for students with pre-professional degrees in architecture. But each school will evaluate students individually, so you should not assume that advanced standing is automatic. The third question is whether or not you will need to provide syllabi for your previous coursework for placement. It's helpful to know this up front so that you can begin to gather all of those materials in advance. It's much easier to do this when you're on campus rather than waiting until the summer when it's harder to get in touch with faculty members. Fourth question is whether or not you're interested in foreign studies experiences and if the schools or programs have those for graduate students. You also want to know how they relate to the curriculum. If foreign studies is important to you, it would be helpful to know the varieties of programs that they offer, as well as whether they work seamlessly with your path of study. You should also ask about the anticipated out-of-pocket expenses for each program. You may find that a program might require an additional semester of study for you to travel abroad, so you should be sure to ask about them. Fifth question is whether or not the program requires professional internships for graduation, and whether or not they have a job placement program, career fairs, or other professional development and networking events and activities. There are programs that require internships before a student can graduate, and since they're generally paid internships and students do not sign up for course credit, they don't always show up on a curricular path that you might find on a website. Sixth question would relate to financial aid and assistantship opportunities. What are the options available to students? Do you need to apply separately? And when will you find out if you're eligible, or when you will find out if you've been awarded aid? You'll find that schools offer aid and assistance to graduate students in a variety of ways. Some may offer in-state tuition to students who are out of state. Some will offer a teaching or research assistantship that may come with either tuition remission and or stipend for living expenses, and some will offer a direct scholarship. Some institutions will tell you whether or not you've received any aid at the time of admission, and some will consider students for aid only once they've accepted their admission offer. It's important to know when you will be hearing from the schools and in what format so that you can make a more informed decision. Now, of course, we all talk about student loan debt, and we know that it's an increasing concern for students when funding graduate education. And you should look very carefully at your own financial situation before incurring more debt. That being said, you should take the time to complete the FAFSA to see what you qualify for in terms of federal aid programs. And you should also look into what federal tax credits might be available to you in paying your tuition costs. The seventh question would be whether or not, when the school had their last accreditation visit, and whether or not it's possible to get a copy of the team's report. Professional programs in architecture in the U.S. are accredited by the NAB. As part of that process, each program prepares an architecture program report, also called the APR, in advance of their accreditation visit. After the visit is complete, the visiting team prepares a report called the VTR that outlines exemplary aspects of the program as well as causes for concern. Both of these reports can give you helpful insights into the program. And these are public documents and should be provided to you upon request, so make sure that you ask for those. The NAB website is also helpful in that it will list the date of the school's last visit along with the date of its next scheduled visit. And you should also be sure to ask for contact information for current or former students who may be able to answer questions from a student perspective. As I said before, asking questions early helps you to narrow your list, but it also helps to let the schools know that you are interested in their programs and that you are being thoughtful about your graduate education. While the amount of research may seem heavy, it will make the rest of the application process go much more smoothly. You will have a draft of your personal statement that you can begin to tailor to each of your schools. And you will have a lot of your questions already answered by the time you get accepted, which is when you'll likely be bogged down in the end of the semester deadlines anyway. More information means a much more informed decision in the end. Of course, if at all possible, you should try to visit as many of the schools on your list as you can. There's nothing like being on site to know whether a program is right for you. When contacting the schools to arrange a visit, try to stay flexible so that you can work with them on determining the best date for your visit. Also, keep in mind and ask yourself whether there are specific faculty you might like to meet with. Would you like to be able to meet with current students over coffee or lunch? Is there a specific studio or course you'd like to sit in on? Those may help to determine the best dates for you to visit campus. Now, some schools will do all the scheduling for you, but others may want you to take the lead and do your own scheduling with the faculty and students. My best advice is to take the lead that the school is providing to you. But now let's talk about the application process. Once you've narrowed your list and know which programs you want to apply to, I recommend creating a master file that lists the deadlines, online application link, and the various requirements for each program. Having it all in one place is a key to making sure that you have submitted everything you need. Also, well in advance of the deadline, be sure to access and review each application to make sure that you're not missing any of the submission requirements that may be buried in the application. The next step would be to start to nuance your personal statement. This is the one time that you get to talk about why that particular institution is the right fit for you. Don't squander that opportunity by submitting a cookie-cutter statement about yourself. And I can't begin to tell you how many graduate applications I have read where each student has gone into excruciating detail about their love for Legos as a child or their dream of designing a vacation home for their parents. Just remember that things like this will not help you stand apart. And as each program is different, each statement should be different. Why do you want to be there? What can you learn that you won't be able to learn anywhere else? And why do you think you will be a valuable contribution to their community? Now, if you're applying into a 2-year Master of Architecture program, a portfolio will be required. 3-year programs may or may not require a portfolio, and this also may vary based on your own educational background. For some schools, they want to review a printed hard copy of your portfolio, but others will prefer to see online portfolios or electronic documents such as a PDF. You should be prepared to present your portfolio in a variety of different formats depending on the school. But keep in mind that your portfolio should be a carefully crafted and well-edited document that shows your strengths as a designer or creative thinker. Architectural works, fine arts, creative writing, musical compositions, all of these may be considered for your portfolio. And one thing to remember is that if you do not feel that a particular project or work shows your strengths, do not include it. Look at each piece and study what it shows about your abilities, and then compare that to the list of skills you outlined in the draft of your personal statement. You want to select works that will show the range of your skills. But also, in the process, be sure to check with each of the schools on your list for their specific portfolio submission requirements. Standardized tests can be an important part of any student's application. Of course, the admissions process is holistic, and admissions committees will be looking carefully at your transcripts and prior coursework, your personal statement and letters of recommendation, and your portfolio. So it's not just one thing that makes the decision. But at some institutions, GREs can help to determine your eligibility for certain scholarships, so you should certainly not discount them or ignore them. In many cases, students feel that their portfolio is very strong, but that they're not a great standardized test taker. My advice is to take the GRE early, possibly in the summer when you're not weighed down with coursework. You have the opportunity to take a few practice tests beforehand, but then you should also take it again in the fall, the early fall, before you're weighed down with coursework and requirements. Many schools will superscore your test, which means that they select the highest score for each part of the test, regardless of the date that you took it, rather than taking that overall highest score that you take on one day. It's important to know if schools will superscore your test. If so, make sure you send all of your test scores to the institutions. If you're an international student, you should also be sure to take the TOEFL, as it will be required by most institutions. Another important part of your application will be your letters of recommendation. And here's some advice on determining who should write your letters of recommendation and how you should approach them. Keep in mind that faculty are getting many requests from your fellow classmates to write letters of recommendation all at the same time, and they may say no, especially if you approach them very late in the process. Keep in mind that your letter can come from a variety of different individuals, a studio critic, a professor in another core course, an employer, an athletic coach, or another mentor. And you should also remember that when someone agrees to write a letter of recommendation for you, it does not automatically mean that they're going to write a good letter of recommendation. You should expect that each person will write an honest and fair assessment of how they see your abilities and preparedness for graduate school. That may help to determine who should be on your list. You should think about each person and what you think they'll contribute to your contribution. Select a group of people who complement one another so that they're telling a much fuller story about you. Selecting 3 studio critics may find that they focus on the same things, leaving a lot of your greatest attributes untold. Ideally, your letters will come from people you have maintained contact with, and they do ask us that on the letter of recommendation form. A professor from your freshman year that you have not had any contact with since will not be able to talk about your intellectual growth or preparedness for graduate school. And if you're applying to a 2-year Master of Architecture program, I would expect to see at least one letter from an advanced design studio critic, either in the spring of your junior year or the fall of your senior year. They will be the ones best qualified to discuss your preparedness for a graduate design studio. If you're applying to a 3-year Master of Architecture program and have been out of school for a while, I would expect to see a letter from a current or recent employer or other colleague who can discuss your work and abilities. As I said before, your faculty members will receive many requests for letters. You should reach out to the potential recommenders early, perhaps by asking their advice on your list of schools. Once a recommender has agreed to write a letter for you, it is your responsibility to provide them with all of the information they need in one clear and concise email or packet of information. List all of your schools in deadline order and include a brief paragraph on each explaining why you are interested in attending. If the school requires an online submission, indicate where that email notification will come from, if you know that, because often the automatic email from the system isn't necessarily descriptive to a faculty member, so it may be ignored or might find their way to their spam folder. And also, you should send a reminder email to your recommenders the day before you submit their names in the system, so they're not surprised by that automatic email. And you should definitely not submit their names if they have not yet agreed to write a letter for you. You should also make sure to give them draft copies of your personal statement, portfolio, and resume so that they can see the range of your design skills, your interests in architecture, as well as your extracurricular activities, honors, and employment. Be sure to ask your recommenders how they would like to see these materials. Don't bog down their email with a 15-megabyte portfolio unless they have agreed to that in advance. And remember, they're generally taking time after hours or over the holidays to write letters for you. So be sure to keep them in the loop. We always want to know where you have been accepted and are happy to answer any questions that come up in the decision-making process. And ultimately, we want to know where you have decided to go and would love to hear about your experiences once you're there. And once you've been accepted, feel free to contact the schools if you have any more questions. Reach out to current and former students. Schedule a visit. Just remember that it seems daunting. It shouldn't be. This is not the biggest decision you're going to make in your life, though it may seem like it. But the more planning you do in the process, the easier the decision will be. Remember, stay calm, plan ahead. So I hope this has been helpful, and I'm more than happy to answer any questions that you have now. Hi, I hope that was helpful and informative, and I already have a few questions in the queue, so don't forget to submit some questions, and we'll be happy to answer some of those. I see many of my colleagues at other institutions participating on the chat, so I certainly hope that they'll help nuance some of my responses to the questions. The first question I had on the list was whether or not all schools have graduate programs, and I think John Case has addressed that. Many do. The important thing to look at is take advantage of perusing through the virtual expo to see some of those schools. You'll also be able to see on the NAB website who have accredited Master of Architecture programs versus accredited Bachelor of Architecture programs. We also have another related question. Nia asked what the difference between the Doctor of Architecture and the Master of Architecture. The NAB accredits schools of architecture, but doesn't necessarily specify the degree name or title. You'll find some that are for undergraduates that are the 5-year Bachelor of Architecture, but then you'll also have the 2-year or 3-year Master of Architecture, and then there is one institution, the University of Hawaii, that has a 7-year Doctor of Architecture, and that's the accredited design degree, or the accredited professional program in architecture at their institution. It does take a longer period of time to complete, but in the end, you'll receive the Doctor of Architecture. I have another question from a student who is a graduate of a fine arts program, receiving a Bachelor of Fine Arts, and is looking for an art-based program that is studio-based, and wondering what schools I might recommend. My focus here is not particularly to recommend particular programs, so I'm sure my colleagues on the chat will weigh in on that. But you'll see that architecture programs are in a variety of different institutions. I'm here at the Georgia Institute of Technology, so we have a very particular kind of focus. You might find other schools of architecture, programs in architecture in Research One institutions, but you'll also find a variety of programs that are in art and design-based institutions. The Rhode Island School of Design, for instance, California College of the Arts are just a few of those examples. So I hope my colleagues will help to weigh in on that. Another question is whether or not I recommend prep courses or summer programs for applicants to M.Arch 3 degrees, and how else should prospective students coming from unrelated backgrounds prepare themselves and be competitive. I think that there are a number of institutions that offer summer programs that might vary in length from 3 to 6 weeks that will give you a very strong sense about what the design studio is like and what that culture might be. So you should definitely look at those. I know that Harvard is one of the ones that has the longest program. It's 6 weeks, but it is geared toward introducing students who have degrees in other fields into the studio-based experience. So you should definitely take a look at those. I might also consider, once you've thought about the courses that you might need, if you need calculus or physics, I would personally recommend taking a studio art course if you haven't done so already. I think it's incredibly helpful for students, especially if you don't have any drawing experience, to be comfortable and facile with the drawing process, because that's such an important part of your initial stages in the architecture design studio. I have another question regarding, from an international student, about with a bachelor's degree from an accredited U.S. university, and whether or not he or she would need to take the TOEFL. Generally, and I would confirm this with your the institutions that might be on your short list, generally if you received a degree from an accredited U.S. institution, you would not have to take the TOEFL. But I would definitely say that you should check with each school because their requirements may vary. Emily asked about degrees in architecture and urban development and how to choose a school that will give experience in both without having to do a dual degree. Of course, the joint degrees, many schools offer joint degrees with architecture and other disciplines, law, city and regional planning, sustainable design, that you may want to look at. It might add some time to the length of study, depending upon how those electives can be cross-counted. But you do complete 2 different degrees and have 2 different credentials. So that may be important for some people. What I would recommend is looking at programs, especially if you're interested in, say, urban development or city and regional planning. And even though you don't want to pursue 2 degrees, going to a school that also has those programs available as full-length programs will allow you to kind of tap into the coursework that they're offering and expose you to urban development in ways that you wouldn't be able to do in a program without one of those degree programs. Okay, they're all popping up in various orders, so I'm trying to make sure I don't miss any. So the personal statement, some schools do not explicitly state in the directions to state information about why you would be good for their school. They simply ask about your interests, career goals, and preparedness. And what would I advise for these personal statements, especially if they have a 500-word limit? I think it's important to be very clear about your interests, and within that you can fold in what aspects of the program interest you the most and why you think that that would be a valuable place for you to be. It's really important to not just kind of talk about the things that everybody else talks about, but why would you be a match? It's kind of like a dating service, if you will, in the sense that you're starting to build a relationship with the school, and you have to see on both sides of the aisle that it's important to have those mutual and common interests. So I would say, even with 500 words, you can write a very well-crafted and statement that gets to the heart of the issues and why you should be at that institution. Oh yeah, so Stephen from University of Massachusetts Amherst said that I might mention that some schools have firm deadlines and others have priority deadlines. I think getting in touch with each of the schools is important because you will get a sense of where you would need to fall in the application process. I know that some institutions will say there is a very firm deadline and they will actually cut off the application so that you can no longer submit an application. Others will allow for you to submit a little later, but knowing that you may no longer be eligible for certain key types of financial assistance. So make sure that you contact those schools. The more you talk to them, the more they know that you're interested in the program. Danielle asked what should be included in a graduate portfolio and whether or not all graduate schools typically require them. I talked about that a little bit in the earlier portion of the presentation, and it will vary based on the school. if you're applying without any background in architecture, some schools will say that a portfolio is still required. I would, I know that it was addressed in the undergraduate session earlier today, I would place less emphasis on digitally drafted work and more emphasis on how you can show you as a creative thinker. I would be much more interested in seeing drawings, built work, compositions, artwork that might start to talk about how you think about things as a creative thinker, but also how you start to understand how parts fit to wholes. Three-dimensional and spatial thinking would be another thing that would be important for us to see in a portfolio for an M.Arch 3 student. Let's see if our next question. Another question is, what are the important qualities that the graduate schools look for in students? I think that that will vary from school to school, and it really talks about what their personal the interests and emphases are within each institution. You'll see that some schools will offer specializations in urban design. Some might look at digital design and fabrication, historic preservation, and that's going to mean that we want to see different things or different interests from our students. We are not interested in having students coming to an institution that all look alike. We want to make sure that we have a diversity of backgrounds from our students, a diversity of opinions, and the way that they work might be differently. So you should make sure that you kind of talk to each school and get a sense of what that personality is like. One question that we have, and it would be harder for me to answer because I'm trying not to talk about specific schools, but what schools are known to have the best scholarships for international students? That's a question that would be very specific to each institution, and you should reach out and contact those schools and find out what opportunities are available to you, especially if you're coming to study in the U.S. on a government-funded scholarship. You may not be able or eligible to work in certain contexts or situations. I know that at several of the institutions that I've worked at, we offer graduate students scholarships, but we also try to employ them as either graduate student assistants teaching in the classroom or doing research with faculty members. And again, if there are some of my colleagues on the chat want to weigh in on that question, feel free. Let's see, I think we're getting ready to wrap up. I've actually run out of time. I'm going to stay on the chat. I hope some of my colleagues will also stay on the chat. I hope you found this helpful, and I'm more than happy to answer any additional questions that you might have. I hope you have a great day and enjoy the virtual expo.